The Earth was once a peaceful planet, bustling with everyday life, with its people going about their daily routines, unaware of the vast cosmos above. But all of that changed in an instant. Without any warning, massive alien ships appeared in the skies, their colossal forms blocking out the sun. They moved slowly, deliberately, with a cold, threatening presence that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who saw them. Cities across the world were plunged into panic as the ships hovered ominously above major capitals. The air was thick with fear as millions watched in awe and terror, unsure of what was about to happen. Governments rushed to prepare for the worst, scrambling to launch countermeasures against the invaders. Military forces around the world mobilized, fighter jets screamed across the skies, and weapons were readied in the hope that humanity could defend itself against this sudden alien onslaught. But no matter what humanity tried, nothing seemed to work. The alien ships were far beyond anything the Earth had ever seen. The military's best weapons, missiles, airstrikes, and laser-guided bombs, were like toys against the terrifying power of the Vraxians. Nothing could penetrate their shields, and every attempt to strike them back failed miserably. It was clear that the Earth's technology was no match for the alien invaders. The moment of realization hit hard. Humanity was outmatched, outgunned, and utterly powerless. As the world watched in hopeless despair, a voice crackled through the airwaves, a voice that was both distant and chillingly direct. It was the Vraxians. Their leader, a cold and calculating figure known only as Threx, spoke to all of humanity in a voice that echoed from the skies. "We are the Vraxians, the masters of the universe. You have but one choice: surrender or face complete annihilation. Your weapons are meaningless against us. We are far beyond your understanding, and we do not seek war. But if you resist, we will destroy your cities, your governments, and all that you hold dear." The words hit like a hammer, and for a moment, the entire planet stood still. Governments scrambled to respond, their leaders torn between their duty to protect their people and the overwhelming realization that there was no way to fight back against the invaders. News outlets around the world were flooded with images of the alien ships, their advanced technology making humanity's most powerful weaponry look like nothing more than a child's toy. The world felt paralyzed, stuck in a suffocating sense of helplessness. In every corner of the globe, people asked the same question: how could we possibly defeat something like this? The Vraxians had made it clear that their power was absolute, their technology so advanced that human efforts to resist were utterly pointless. As the days passed, fear and panic set in, and whispers of the inevitable spread from person to person. Would Earth surrender? Would humanity bend to the will of a race that saw them as nothing more than ants beneath their feet? No one knew. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the alien ships loomed overhead, each moment bringing humanity closer to the unthinkable. Yet, even as the situation grew darker and darker, there was a strange feeling that something was stirring beneath the surface, something that humanity had yet to understand. The thought lingered in the back of people's minds. Could there be a way out of this? Or had humanity already lost? Only time would tell. The invaders had made their threat clear. The world had no choice but to wait and see what came next. The final battle, it seemed, had begun, though no one could have predicted how it would unfold. Would humanity give in, or would they somehow find a way to fight back? The suspense grew with every passing hour, as the shadows of the alien ships grew longer and longer across the Earth's surface. The world was at a crossroads, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. As the Vraxians began their occupation, Earth was plunged into a state of deep despair. Cities were occupied, and every move was dictated by their alien conquerors. Yet, amid this oppressive silence, something strange and unexpected began to happen. In the quiet corners of the world, away from the devastation, subtle changes were occurring within human beings. At first, it was only a whisper, a flicker of awareness, a strange sensation that seemed to ripple through the collective human mind. People felt a sudden burst of energy, an awareness that they were connected to something beyond themselves. This was no ordinary moment of hope. It was something far deeper. Scientists, who had been tirelessly searching for a way to understand the invaders' technology, stumbled upon an even more remarkable discovery. Humans, unbeknownst to most, possessed a dormant psychic ability. The ancient power had been buried deep in the genetic makeup of humankind, so deeply that it had been lost to history. For centuries, the potential for such a power lay unnoticed, hidden in plain sight. But now, in this moment of crisis, it was awakening. Researchers, in a desperate attempt to find any edge against the Vraxians, began testing individuals who showed the slightest signs of unusual mental or physical strength. The results were shocking. It was as if the mind itself had become a tool, capable of influencing the physical world. Some individuals could move objects with a simple thought, while others began to experience strange bursts of energy that seemed to radiate from their bodies. There was one woman in particular, a scientist named Dr. Elena Rivera, who experienced an overwhelming surge of power. She had always been sensitive to the emotions of others, but now she could feel them in a way that transcended mere empathy. She could influence thoughts, calm panicked minds, and even communicate without speaking. She was not the only one. Around the world, similar abilities began to manifest. In crowded cities, on remote islands, in quiet towns, people began to feel the power awakening within them. At first, it was an overwhelming experience. Many individuals couldn't understand what was happening or why. Some panicked, others embraced their newfound abilities. But soon, as the days passed, humans started to realize that they were not just passive victims anymore. They were becoming active players in their own fate. Governments, once entirely dependent on technology and military strength, now turned to these extraordinary individuals for help. These newly awakened people were able to communicate across vast distances, bypassing technology altogether. Messages were sent from one end of the earth to the other in the blink of an eye, without the need for phones, radios, or any digital devices. It was as though the very essence of humanity was unlocking. They could feel each other's thoughts, share emotions, and even send images or visions of distant places to one another. But that was just the beginning. Some humans were able to manipulate energy, directing powerful waves of force with only their minds. They could push against walls of alien technology, sending ripples through the invaders' equipment, weakening their advanced weapons systems. It was a subtle, almost invisible form of resistance at first. The Vraxians, too focused on their plans of domination, didn't notice the small signs of change. But soon they would. The awakening of this power spread like wildfire, and it wasn't just in a handful of individuals. More and more humans began to show signs of psychic abilities. It seemed as though the very survival of humanity was linked to this forgotten power. It wasn't long before these new gifted individuals began to train, honing their abilities. Dr. Rivera worked tirelessly with others to understand the full extent of their powers. They were learning how to not just influence minds, but how to focus their energy, how to project their will into the world. And as they grew stronger, so did their resolve. They were no longer waiting for the Vraxians to make the next move. Humanity had found its own strength, one that had been hidden for millennia. As the days passed, this power continued to spread, and the world began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The Vraxians, so certain in their dominance, were facing an unforeseen force. Humanity's resilience, its unity, and the mind-bending potential of the hidden psychic powers that lay dormant within them. The final battle had yet to come, but the human race was beginning to understand that it didn't need to fight with weapons. It had something much more powerful, and the Vraxians would soon learn just how much humanity was capable of. The world held its breath as Elena Rivera and her team, a group of individuals who had recently awakened to the power of the human mind, prepared for their first direct encounter with the Vraxian leader. The plan was risky. In fact, it was more than risky, it was a gamble. Humanity's last hope rested on the shoulders of a handful of people who had only recently discovered their newfound abilities. But something told Elena that this moment was crucial. The time for running, hiding, and waiting had passed. Now, Humanity had to show the Vraxians that there was more to Earth than just its physical defenses. There was power in the human spirit, power that the invaders couldn't begin to understand. The team gathered in a small, secret location, their minds intertwined as they focused on the task ahead. Their psychic abilities had grown stronger with time, allowing them to connect with each other in ways that were still difficult to explain. The moment had come. Elena's plan was simple. She would make contact with the Vraxian commander, Frex, not through force or violence, but by using their minds. If they could reach him on a deeper level, one beyond the surface of power and domination, perhaps they could change the course of the invasion. They formed a mental link, concentrating all their energy into a single powerful thought. It was as if their minds fused together, forming a united front. The world outside seemed to fade away as Elena and her team focused, reaching out across the vast distance between them and the Vraxian ship. The connection was fragile at first, like a spark in the dark, but then something incredible happened. Through their combined efforts, they made contact. They could feel the alien presence, a cold, calculating consciousness, floating in the empty void of space, but something was different. It was not the same as the sharp, impersonal broadcasts they had received from the Vraxians. No, this time, there was something receptive, something waiting. Elena took a deep breath, and with a mental push, she reached out to Threx, the Vraxian commander. It wasn't a simple message, not like speaking into a radio or sending a signal. This was a direct connection, a meeting of minds. With her team's help, she projected a flood of human emotions into the commander's consciousness. Compassion, love, fear, and hope. She wanted him to experience the depth of humanity's spirit. She wanted him to understand that there was more to Earth than just people fighting to survive. There were dreams, families, friendships, and a longing for peace. At first, Frex seemed unaffected, as if he were resistant to the feelings pouring into his mind. He was an alien after all, so far removed from the human experience. But as the flood of emotions grew stronger, something began to shift. The Vraxian commander felt it, a sense of confusion, a disruption in his usual thoughts. He had never been forced to confront emotions like these. Compassion was foreign to him. Love was a strange concept. Hope was something he had never needed, but it was all there in the rawest form, flooding his consciousness. For the first time, Frex had to face what it meant to be human, to feel what humans felt. It was an overwhelming experience. He had known war and conquest, but the feelings he was now experiencing were unlike anything he had ever known. Fear, yes, but also an unexpected sense of connection. He was not alone in the universe. There was more to humanity than just resistance. There was a depth to them that he had never considered. Elena, feeling the shift in Frex's mind, did not demand surrender. She did not threaten him with violence or destruction. Instead, she presented a challenge, one that would shake the foundation of the Vraxian invasion. "Can you understand us without the need to destroy?" she asked, her voice not through words, but through emotion and thought. The silence that followed was thick with tension. For the first time, the Vraxians were forced to confront something they had never thought to consider: the complexity of the human spirit. They had underestimated humanity, viewing Earth as just another planet to conquer. But now they were faced with something far more difficult to handle, an entirely new kind of battle, one fought not with weapons, but with understanding. The commander hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The emotions that surged through him were unsettling, and for a brief moment, he questioned everything he had been taught about conquest and power. Could the Vraxians truly understand humanity? Could they find a way to live alongside them, or was destruction the only answer? Elena and her team waited, their minds linked, their hope hanging in the balance. The first contact had been made, and for the first time, the Vraxians had to face the reality that not all battles are won with firepower. Some are won with the mind, with emotion, and with the unyielding power of the human spirit. The question now was whether Threx and the Vraxians were ready to accept that. The Vraxians, so sure of their superiority, had always relied on their immense technological power and brutal tactics to subdue any race they encountered. Conquest had been their way of life for centuries. But now, after the unexpected encounter with the humans, their entire approach was called into question. The commander, Threx, had been left deeply unsettled by the emotions and thoughts that flooded his mind during the mental contact with Elena and her team. His once unwavering belief in the Vraxian way, conquer and dominate, was now shaken. He could no longer dismiss humanity as a primitive species. They were different. The humans had shown a strength not in physical force, but in something far more dangerous: their capacity for connection, empathy, and resolve. The Vraxians had never faced such an enemy. Their soldiers, trained for nothing but war and destruction, now found themselves caught in an internal conflict. As they went about their missions, they began to question the morality of their invasion. Were they really the superior beings they had once believed themselves to be? Why had they been so quick to destroy without trying to understand? Small groups of Vraxian soldiers, once unwavering in their loyalty to their cause, started to show signs of doubt. Some refused to carry out orders, while others openly discussed the feelings of confusion and unease that had begun to take root in their minds. The more they tried to push these emotions aside, the stronger they became. The mental bombardment from the humans was subtle but powerful, making it impossible to ignore the deep emotions that had been awakened within them. The Vraxians had been trained to crush rebellions, but now they were facing a different kind of resistance, one that did not rely on weapons, but on the very heart of the human spirit. Unable to ignore the growing turmoil among their ranks, the Vraxian leadership made a decision. If this was to end, it could not be with force. They had to understand what had happened, why the humans were so different. They could no longer rely on their tried and true methods of domination. They needed to know more. Threx sent an envoy to Earth to initiate a formal negotiation. The humans, ever cautious but willing to explore any opportunity for peace, agreed to meet. The envoy arrived, a high-ranking Vraxian diplomat, surrounded by an elite guard. But as they approached the human representatives, they quickly realized something that made them stop in their tracks. The humans were not only willing to speak, they had more power than they had anticipated. The Vraxians were accustomed to seeing their soldiers overpower weak, frightened species with ease, but this was different. Elena and her team, along with other humans who had tapped into their psychic abilities, met the envoy's group with calm but intense mental presence. The Vraxians' own envoy felt the full force of the humans' abilities as soon as they entered the room. The humans were not just speaking words, they were sending thoughts, emotions, and images directly into their minds. The Vraxians, who had thought they could manipulate the situation with intimidation, found themselves on the receiving end of a mental barrage. They could feel the warmth of human compassion, the depth of their struggle for survival, and the unyielding determination to preserve their world. At first, the Vraxians tried to counter, using their own advanced mental shielding to block the humans' attempts to communicate. But they quickly discovered that the humans' psychic abilities were far more advanced than they had ever imagined. The shields, while effective against other species, were no match for the strength of human will. The Vraxians could not fight what they didn't understand. It was as though they were trying to battle an invisible force, one that was far more subtle and complex than the weapons they had grown so accustomed to using. The Vraxians were perplexed. They had always relied on brute strength and overwhelming power to conquer and control, but now they faced an enemy that did not need to fight in the traditional sense. These humans were not interested in physical domination. They didn't want to destroy. They wanted to communicate, to connect, to challenge the very notion that might made right. The Vraxians' envoy returned to their leadership with this new, unsettling knowledge. The humans were not like any species they had ever encountered. Their peaceful resolve, combined with their ability to use their minds as weapons, made them far more dangerous than any physical force. The Vraxians were forced to confront the terrifying truth: humanity was not just a species to conquer, it was a force to be reckoned with. They would need to rethink their entire strategy. The question was no longer whether they could defeat humanity. It was whether they could understand it without succumbing to the very emotions they had once sought to suppress. The Vraxians were no longer sure if their mission could succeed, or if they even wanted it to. After the unexpected encounter with the humans, the Vraxian leadership was left grappling with the realization that their usual methods of control might not be enough. The peaceful yet powerful force they were up against was something entirely new, something beyond their comprehension. In response, the Vraxians devised a challenge, a test of wills designed to push humanity to its breaking point. They called it the Trial of Resolve. The challenge was deceptively simple. Humans must endure a series of psychological and emotional trials designed to exploit their deepest fears, doubts, and weaknesses. The Vraxians, who believed themselves to be masters of psychological manipulation, expected the humans to crumble under the pressure. They assumed that, once faced with their most intense inner struggles, humans would break and submit to the superior will of the Vraxians. But what the Vraxians didn't anticipate was the depth of human resilience. Across the globe, as the challenge began, humans were subjected to visions, fears, and intense emotional ordeals, tailored to make them doubt themselves. These trials tapped into the darkest corners of the human psyche: grief, loss, isolation, and the fear of the unknown. Vraxian-controlled simulations twisted reality, forcing individuals to face their greatest traumas, to relive the most painful moments of their lives. Yet, as the trials intensified, something remarkable began to happen. The humans, instead of succumbing to despair, began to draw upon their newfound psychic powers. As they faced their inner demons, they used their abilities to confront them, not through force or resistance, but through understanding. They reached deep into their own minds and the minds of others, offering comfort, strength, and compassion in ways that the Vraxians had never seen. It was a collective effort, an unspoken bond between people around the world, united not by their fear, but by their shared ability to overcome it. Individuals found that they could communicate with each other, offering support across vast distances. With their psychic abilities, they shared their strength, pushing each other to persevere. One person's pain became another's resolve, and where there was doubt, there was always someone else to offer hope. The Vraxian trials, designed to break humanity's spirit, instead revealed something that the Vraxians had never accounted for: the power of empathy. The humans didn't just survive, they thrived. What had been intended to divide them, to isolate them in their worst fears, had only made them stronger. As the tests grew more complex and the challenges more brutal, the Vraxians began to notice a shift. Their tactics were losing their grip. The more the humans were pushed, the more they adapted. Their ability to cooperate, to reach out to each other, and to understand their own pain allowed them to overcome the seemingly insurmountable obstacles the Vraxians had set in their path. The humans were evolving before the Vraxians' very eyes. They weren't just surviving, they were reshaping the very rules of the challenge. The Vraxians, accustomed to conquering through sheer dominance and fear, were now faced with a species that refused to be broken. The humans' greatest strength was not in their ability to fight back with violence, but in their capacity for compassion and cooperation. The more the Vraxians pushed, the more the humans' unity grew, and with it, their power. What had started as a test of human weakness became a testament to human strength. The Vraxians, baffled and frustrated, were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth: their most powerful weapon, fear, had no effect on the human race. Instead of bending to their will, the humans had turned their trials into an opportunity for growth, for understanding, and for connection. It was a power the Vraxians could not counter, and it was proving to be far stronger than they had ever anticipated. As the trials came to an end, the Vraxian leadership watched in disbelief as humans stood, united and resolute, having emerged from the challenge not only intact but stronger than ever. The Vraxians had underestimated them. They had believed that by imposing fear and emotional strain, they could control humanity. But what they had discovered was that the more they pushed, the more humanity adapted and overcame. The test had been a failure, an unexpected twist that left the Vraxians questioning their entire approach. The humans had proven, without a doubt, that their resolve was far greater than anything the Vraxians could understand. And now the question remained: what would the Vraxians do next, when faced with an enemy who could never be conquered by fear alone? As the days passed and the humans' resistance continued to grow, something inside the Vraxians began to shift. What had started as a simple invasion to conquer a primitive world was quickly evolving into a conflict that neither side could easily resolve. The humans, far from the weak, fearful species the Vraxians had anticipated, were proving to be far more than they had bargained for. Their resistance had not only withstood every challenge the Vraxians had thrown at them, it was becoming stronger with every passing day. The humans' psychic abilities, their unity, and their unwavering resolve were not just surviving, they were thriving. The Vraxians, who had prided themselves on their technological superiority and brutal tactics, were beginning to see that their advantage was slipping. The humans' ability to inspire, to influence others with nothing more than their intentions, was something that the Vraxians had never encountered. It was unlike anything they had experienced in their countless conquests across the galaxy. While the Vraxians were adept at controlling and intimidating, the humans seemed to have a natural gift for motivating and uniting others. Their power did not lie in weapons or machines, but in their ability to connect on a deeply emotional level. It was as if every human, no matter their background or station, had become a part of something greater than themselves. And as the resistance continued to grow, the Vraxians were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that this unity was something they could not break. Alien soldiers, once cold and ruthless, began to feel the weight of their actions. They had been trained to fight, to conquer, to destroy. But now they found themselves questioning the very orders they had followed without hesitation for so long. They could feel the influence of the humans' intentions on a level they didn't understand. It was subtle at first, small doubts creeping into their minds, but as time went on, the effect grew stronger. The soldiers who had once been unwavering in their loyalty to the Vraxian cause now began to falter. Some started to question their purpose, others openly discussed their growing discomfort with the invasion. There were even reports of Vraxian soldiers defecting, leaving the battlefield and joining the humans' cause. This had never happened before. The Vraxians had always been able to maintain strict control over their forces through fear and obedience. But now that control was slipping away, piece by piece. The realization spread throughout the ranks. The humans were not a species to be dominated. Their power lay not in their weapons or their technology, but in their hearts and minds. The humans had discovered a strength within themselves that the Vraxians could not counter, an inner power that transcended any weapon or technological advantage. Faced with this growing disillusionment within their own ranks, the Vraxian leaders found themselves at a crossroads. For the first time in their history, they were forced to re-evaluate everything they had believed about survival, power, and conquest. The old ways, domination through force, control through fear, were no longer effective. And so the alien leaders convened in secret, debating their next course of action. They had always seen themselves as the superior species, destined to rule the galaxy. Yet here they were, facing an opponent who could not be intimidated, who could not be defeated through conventional means. The humans' ability to endure, to inspire, and to connect with each other on such a profound level was something the Vraxians had never anticipated. As the days passed, the Vraxians began to understand that they were not merely dealing with a primitive species, but with a civilization on the cusp of something extraordinary. The potential within humanity was vast. Untapped, yes, but far greater than they had ever imagined. The Vraxian leaders found themselves grappling with a difficult choice: continue their invasion and risk further conflict with a species that was rapidly proving to be more than they could handle, or attempt to make peace with a civilization that they could no longer dominate. The idea of peace, of coexistence with humanity, was something they had never considered. For generations, the Vraxians had lived by the principle that only the strongest could survive, that the weak must be crushed. But now, with the tide of battle turning in humanity's favor, they were faced with a new question. Could they learn to accept that power doesn't always come from domination? Could they, for the first time in their history, choose to walk away from their conquest and attempt to understand this remarkable species? It was a question that left the Vraxian leadership divided, unsure of the path ahead. The invasion that had seemed so certain now hung in the balance, and the fate of both the Vraxians and the humans would soon be decided by a choice that none of them had anticipated. In an astonishing twist that no one could have predicted, the Vraxians made an announcement that sent shockwaves around the world. After months of conflict, psychological trials, and battles that had seemed all but lost, the Vraxian fleet, once poised to crush humanity under their immense power, declared a retreat. The alien race, once so certain of their superiority, was now withdrawing, leaving Earth untouched, its people standing tall in defiance. The news spread like wildfire, and for the first time since the invasion began, there was a sense of cautious hope among the human population. The Vraxian commanders, who had come to Earth with the sole intent of conquering, now expressed a surprising desire for peace. They did not simply leave, but instead offered a peace treaty, one that would allow both races to coexist. The treaty was not just about ceasing hostilities, but about something far deeper, a request from the Vraxians to learn from humanity. They acknowledged that humanity's incredible resilience, emotional depth, and the unity displayed by people all over the world had changed them forever. They wanted to understand what made humans so different from any species they had encountered before. They wanted to understand the power that drove humanity to resist, to unite, and to fight not with weapons, but with their hearts and minds. At first, the humans were understandably cautious. The scars of the invasion were still fresh, and many feared that this could be a trick, a final attempt by the Vraxians to lull them into a false sense of security before striking again. But as they saw the sincerity in the Vraxian leaders' actions, the atmosphere slowly shifted. The world's leaders gathered, and after much deliberation, they made the decision to accept the Vraxians' offer. They agreed to the peace treaty, but with strict terms and conditions to ensure that Earth would remain safe from any future threats. The humans knew that they had to remain vigilant, but they also recognized that this was a unique opportunity to forge a new kind of relationship with the Vraxians, one built on understanding rather than fear. The world watched in awe as the final battle that had seemed inevitable was avoided, not through violence, but through the strength of human spirit. The humans had shown that their true power lay not in their technology or their ability to fight, but in their capacity for empathy, cooperation, and resilience. In a universe where might often made right, humanity had proven that peace could be achieved without the need for force. As the treaty was signed and the Vraxians began their departure, they left behind a changed Earth, one that had become a beacon of peace and cooperation for the rest of the universe. The message was clear. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its guns, its bombs, or its spaceships. It had always been the heart and mind of every individual. The Vraxians, having experienced the depth of human emotions and the unbreakable bonds that united them, had come to understand that power did not always lie in domination. They left Earth not as conquerors, but as humbled visitors who had learned an invaluable lesson. As the Vraxian fleet faded into the distance, the people of Earth stood united, realizing that the true victory was not in the battle they had fought, but in the way they had shown the universe the strength of the human spirit. It was a victory of understanding, of compassion, and of hope, a victory that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The final battle had been won, not with weapons, but through the power of the human heart and mind, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary strength comes from the most unexpected places.